Well, I'm just delighted to be here. The first word I got of this a few months ago, I said, that's a marvelous idea to talk about the Nicene Creed, the year of its anniversary, as a way of, establishing a deeper dialogue between the East and West. Your Eminence, thank you for your friendship over the years. We met a few years ago and we had dinner here at Victoria's in Rochester. And he gave me a beautiful gift of an icon, which I have right in front of me in my chapel when I pray my holy hour every morning. So I think of him when I pray every morning. So thank you, Your Eminence, for your hospitality and for this chance to address this marvelous topic in this marvelous place. Let me begin with a little anecdote. This goes back many years when I was working in the parish. And a gentleman who was a well-respected member of our parish community, I think he was a teacher in our catechetical program, came up to me and said, Father, I got a question for you. I always wondered, the creed we recite every Sunday, and we say, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made. Does that mean anything? Yes. And I said, yes, it means everything. But it's emblematic in a way, I think, that this central statement of our Christian faith that we celebrate the anniversary of this year needs to be reiterated. It needs to be understood more profoundly because it is indeed the standing or falling point of Christianity. This is where, in some ways, the great battle was fought in the year 325. And that's why we rehearse the victory every Sunday by saying precisely those words. So it's very important for us, both East and West, for all Christians, to revisit it. Reflect first on the fact that Nicaea took place in the year 325. Long time ago, yes, but also, 300 years after the dying and rising of the Lord. So the Christian community had been thinking a lot for 3 centuries about the central mystery. Namely, who is Jesus? So clearly from the biblical witness that Jesus is a human figure, no one really doubts that, the Docetus maybe did. But he's also someone who consistently spoke and acted in the very person of God. My son, your sins are forgiven. Well, only God can forgive sins, the bystanders say. That's the point. You've heard it said in the Torah, but I say, breathtaking for a first century Jew. You've heard it said in the Torah, that's God's own word, but I say, claiming authority over the Torah. Who could do that but God himself? Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Well, who could say that? No merely human figure. Unless you love me more than your mother and father, more than your very life, you're not worthy of me. Well, no merely human figure could say that. So what's bequeathed to the early Christian tradition is this dilemma, this problem. How is he both human and divine? Well, go back to figures like Irenaeus of Lyon, Tertullian, Justin the Martyr, Origen, many others. They were trying to sort through this problem. Well, things come to a kind of head in 325, and that's because of this figure called Arius of Alexandria. Now, who was Arius? Arius was a priest of Alexandria, and like a lot of people in that city at that time, was given to highly abstract speculation. In our culture, and here we are near the Mayo Clinic, in our culture we reverence the physical scientists. Well, back in those days, it wasn't so much the physical scientists, but the philosophers and theologians they reverenced. So Arius comes of age in this very heady milieu of philosophical and theological reflection. What's he interested in? Our great question, who is Jesus? And Arius proposes his famous answer. And for its time, it was a very clever answer indeed. Arius said, look, we have to hang on to the sovereignty and unicity of God. So this Logos who becomes flesh in Jesus can't really be God in the full sense. But the Logos is the highest creature of God. The highest creature that's come forth from God is the Logos. And then all of us other creatures are underneath the Logos. So this very high, quasi-divine figure becomes flesh. Now, what does flesh mean? Well, Arius thought it's pretty awkward to say that the Logos is competing with the human mind and soul. So the human mind and soul are supplanted by the Logos. So Jesus is quasi-divine, not really divine, and also quasi-human, not fully human. He's a hybrid. He's a mix of the two. Might seem peculiar to us, but keep in mind the mythological framework that wasn't totally alien to that time and place. Think of someone like Hercules or Achilles, demigod, demi-human. Well, that's Arius' proposal, right? Clever, and it solves some problems theologically. In some ways, the dilemma goes away. They say, too, that Arius was very attractive, charismatic, a very good speaker, and even a singer and songwriter. I make him sound like Elton John, but he would sing and he would compose songs. And if you want to be a popular figure, it's great to have a catchphrase, right? Well, he had a catchphrase, which was, there was a time when he was not. The he in question is the Logos. It's his way of saying, okay, the Logos is very high, very important figure, but not divine. There was never a time when God was not, but there was a time when the Logos was not. And Arius put that phrase into songs and into his sermons and into his public speeches. Well, he becomes a popular figure and a divisive figure. Some people loved his solution to it. Others said, no, you're betraying the heart of the Christian faith. So there were conversations, arguments, local councils held to answer Arius. But his views kept spreading outside of Alexandria to the wider Eastern Mediterranean world. Now, what's happening at the same time geopolitically? The rise of Constantine, right? So the Roman Empire had split kind of in two. There were Caesars of the West and of the East. Constantine consolidates power. He wants to be emperor of the United Roman Empire, has his new capital city in Constantinople, the city of Constantine, and his newly found Christian faith. He wants to be the glue that holds the empire together. What does he notice? Just when I want Christianity to be the glue that unites us, these Christians are fighting with each other about who Jesus is. So Constantine says, time for a council. Time for a gathering of bishops so that we can determine this Arian problem. Where did he gather them? Well, the little town of Nicaea, about 50 miles southeast of Constantinople. He wanted these bishops close to him, so he'd keep an eye on them. He sent his own court theologian, a man named Hosius, to watch over things. And so the Council of Nicaea takes place in the summer of 325, so exactly 1700 years ago. It was a gathering of about 200 bishops, and we have the list of who was there. There's a legend, that Santa Claus was there, that St. Nicholas, who indeed was a bishop at that time in a place called Myra, not that far from there, but he's not listed in the official list, so it's probably a legend. But the further story, that St. Nicholas was there and punched Arius in the nose. It's a great story. I wish it were true. Who knows? Maybe it was. But it is true that Arius himself came to Nicaea to argue his position. And throughout the summer of 325, they went back and forth. But then the Council Fathers took this decision, which we celebrate to this day. We repeat it to this day because we've intuited it is the standing or falling point of Christianity. And let me now just go to some of these famous words. And I think they might take on a deeper meaning as we say them now. What do we hear about the Logos from the Nicene Creed? That he was born of the Father before all ages. What's that? Wrong, Arius. You said there was a time when he was not. No, he was born of the Father before all ages. There never was a time when he was not. He shares fully in the divinity of the Father. Now, in case you missed it, he's God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Boom, 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 if you want, right? Don't miss it. Arius, you're wrong. The one who comes forth from the Father, this Logos, is fully divine, shares in the divinity of the Father. And then we find this famous term. It was God from God, light from light, true God from true God. Begotten, not made. He's begotten, not made. I think of my friend from years ago saying, Father, does that mean anything? Begotten, not made. Well, it means a lot. In the Greek, genetos with two N's, two N's, as opposed to genetos with one. That's begotten as opposed to made. Now, what's the difference? Let me do just a little parenthesis here. At Nicaea, there was the Bishop of Alexandria. His name, of course, was Alexander. Alexander of Alexandria was there. With him was a young man, not an official member of the synod, but he was there as an assistant. His name was Athanasios. We know him as Saint Athanasius. He was a deacon assisting Alexander of Alexandria. And he was watching things very carefully at Nicaea. And it became for him the decisive moment. He spent the rest of his life, because he took Alexander's place as bishop when he died, he spent the rest of his life defending Nicaea. At a time when, trust me, after Nicaea, lots of people continued holding Arius' position. And Athanasius kept saying, no, kept fighting it. He writes a great text against the Arians in which he lays out the distinction between begetting and making. Now here it is. What's begotten comes from another. Okay. We say the Son comes from the Father. What's made comes from another. So we've all come forth from God, right? So in that sense, begetting and making are the same. What's the difference? What's begotten entirely participates in that from which it comes forth. What's made participates only to a degree. So, for example, do we all reflect something of God's being? Yeah. We participate to some degree in the to be of God, but we don't perfectly participate. Otherwise, we'd all be God, right? But the Son who comes forth from the Father perfectly participates in the being of the Father. Next distinction, what's begotten comes forth automatically, ineluctably, inevitably. What's made comes forth as a result of an act of the will. Does God have to create us? No. We're created because God chose to. Didn't have to, but He chose to. But the Son is not created. The Son comes forth automatically by a metaphysical necessity from the Father. That, Athanasius explained, is the difference between begetting and making. So the Son, begotten, not made. Now, dare I speak of St. Augustine in this holy Eastern place here. Augustine, whose feast day is tomorrow in the Western Church. Augustine, you say, well, give me an example of this. What's something that's begotten that I can relate to? Augustine's famous example is the way the mind can utterly know itself. The mind can form an image of itself, not splitting into two minds, but the inner word, he says, that comes forth from the mind participates perfectly in the being of the mind. Says Augustine, that's a model for the Trinitarian procession of the Son from the Father. So, but going back to Nicaea, that's the hinge distinction. The Son is begotten, not made. So he fully participates. And now this comes to our famous word. I think that's in the title of my talk for tonight. So he's God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, and then homoousios with the Father. Now we used to, when I was a kid, it was translated as one in being with the Father. Now we say consubstantial with the Father. In many ways, it's the central word of the Nicene Creed. It was made up for the occasion by Hosius, by the way, that theologian that Constantine brought. He proposed that kind of a neologism. Ousia means substance in Greek. Homo means the same. He's of the same substance as the Father. He's one in being with the Father. Consubstantial with the Father. Not two separate beings, right? Two separate beings that'd be different substances. But the Son, though distinct from the Father, begotten of the Father, is consubstantial with the Father. The Son is fully divine. Do you see how in these little phrases, it's again and again hitting at areas? There was a time when he was not. He's not really God. He's just a high creature. No, 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 no. Again and again. And then it's summed up in a way by that word, homoousios, one in being with the Father. You want to hear, this is a little bit of theological trivia, but there's a famous battle in theology over literally one iota. So after Nicaea, this debate continues, right? And so the homoousians were those that hung on to the Nicene doctrine. There were others like Arius that just said, no, he's not divine at all. But then there was a middle ground, the homoiousians. Homoi means of similar substance. Homoousios, same substance. So some say, Arius is not right, but I'm not going to go all the way to this one in being. That makes the Son and Father seem to be completely non-distinct. So let's compromise and say they're of like substance. The battle literally over one iota. This is the period after Nicaea, during the bulk of the 4th century, as the church is trying to sift its way through this language. Let me just bring this now a little bit to our own time. Go back to the 19th century. There was a great figure called Johann Adam Müller. He's from Tübingen in Germany. He began his career very much as a liberal Christian theologian. He was following Friedrich Schleiermacher, who was the founder of modern liberal Protestantism. Schleiermacher had a very low Christology. He saw Jesus as the man with the perfect God consciousness. So we all have God consciousness to some degree. We wouldn't be in this room if we didn't. And then saints have a really high God consciousness. And then Jesus is the man who had a perfect, just perfect understanding of God. And that was Schleiermacher's Christology. Do you see it echoed in the 19th century? Do you see it echoed very clearly in the 20th century? Yeah, a lot of the people, frankly, that I read going through the seminary were Schleiermacherians. They would have seen Jesus as a kind of a high saint, someone with a very high consciousness. Well, Johann Adam Müller, as a young man, takes in Schleiermacher, believes him, writes about him, and then has a conversion. And he realizes, no. If that's all Jesus is, he doesn't save us. Now, in saying that, Johann Adam Müller, 19th century, echoes Athanasius from the 4th century. So Athanasius, contra mundum, they always call him. He's against the world because he kept fighting against the Arians. But Athanasius made that same argument. If Jesus is not truly human, then I'm not saved, right? But if he's not truly divine, I'm not saved. Because look, we're all great, but we're all in the same boat, as Chesterton said, and we're all seasick, right? We're all sinners in this room. We're all spiritual failures in this room. If I looked at some merely human figure, I don't care how great he is, how great his God consciousness is, he's not going to save me. Athanasius and Johann Adam Müller both came to the same conclusion. Only if he is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, can he save me. This led Müller to write a text toward the end of, he lived only a short time, to about 42, but toward the end of his career called Athanasius der Große in his German, Athanasius the Great. He realized that's the voice that we need. John Henry Newman, one of my great intellectual heroes, just named a doctor of the church, right, a few weeks ago. Newman comes back from Rome as a young man. He goes there and he realizes there needs to be a reform of the Anglican church. And he says, what's needed is a new Athanasius. Right. Paul Tillich, 20th century Protestant theologian, born and raised in Germany, began teaching there, but then came to our country later in his life. And he referred to Nicaea as the Gettysburg of Christianity. It was the battle. It was the fight. If we had lost that one, we would have lost the war. Dead right, seems to me. If we had lost Nicaea, Christianity would have devolved into maybe a sect of Judaism or an old mythology or some new form of Neoplatonism. It would have ceased being Christianity. And I think, everybody, that's why it's important for us to gather here and to celebrate this great anniversary. Because we're lost in this room. We're sinners in this room. We're all longing for salvation. We cling to each other. That is not enough. If we really want to be saved, we have to turn to the one who is God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Only in Him do we find salvation. God bless you all. Thanks for listening.